In January 2021, representatives of the Gulf Cooperation Council met at a summit in the Saudi city of Al Ula. The agenda of this summit was singular: to end the blockade of Qatar and to restore the GCC's cohesion. The summit changed the regional atmosphere and rhetoric of war among Saudi, Emirati and Qatari decision makers. Saudi Arabia, UAE, Bahrain and Egypt immediately lifted their blockade on Qatar and restored diplomatic relations with the country. Qatar, on its part, suspended its World Trade Organization case against the UAE's economic isolation efforts. In 2017, the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain and Egypt cut diplomatic ties with Qatar, accusing it of sponsoring terror. Several other nations followed suit, while others downgraded their diplomatic ties with Doha and introduced a total blockade. Doha consistently denied the accusations, insisting that regional discontent with its economic success was behind the hostile policies. The impasse was overcome in January when Saudi Arabia hosted the 41st summit of the Gulf Cooperation Council, where a declaration was adopted to restore unity among Gulf nations. However, the end of the embargo on Qatar and the restoration of its ties with the United Arab Emirates could not resolve their deep-seated differences. Qatar, the tiny but wealthy Sunni Muslim Gulf state, has become famous for punching above its weight. It became a household name when it started the famous Al Jazeera television network and got involved in a number of international disputes as mediator, including the conflict in Sudan's Darfur region and the rift between the Palestinian factions Fatah and Hamas. It has also been actively involved in the Arab Spring uprisings, supporting the armed rebellions in Libya and Syria. In June 2013, Sheikh Hamad bin Khalifa Al Thani, Qatar's ambitious 61-year-old Emir, handed control of the wealthy Gulf state to his son, the British-educated Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani, and under him, Qatar's style of diplomacy changed significantly. The two sheikdoms, UAE and Qatar, are strikingly alike in many ways, especially in their skillful exploitation of economic and demographic challenges to acquire political clout across the Middle East and North African Muslim nations. In the post-Al Ula era, peace appears on the surface, and beneath it lies the spirit of competition and aggression via the indirect foreign policies of Qatar and the UAE. Both use their financial and media powers to challenge the other's narratives. After the Al Ula declaration came the Hollywood movie The Misfits, that portrays Qatar as Jaziristan, a global financer of terror. The movie was co-produced by the UAE, Paramount Pictures and the Highland Film Group, and mentioned Qatari institutions such as the Al Imadi Hospital, the Lakevia Police Force and Al Jazeera supporting the state's terror activities. Another example of behind-the-scenes competition can be seen in the UAE's attempt to encourage journalists in Africa to campaign against Qatar's hosting of the 2022 FIFA World Cup. Since the 2011 Arab Spring protests, the UAE and Qatar have advanced competing visions for the region's future. The UAE has condemned Islamist civil society movements such as the Muslim Brotherhood and, with few exceptions, has supported the forces of counter-revolution against those of political pluralism. Saudi Arabia, Egypt and Bahrain aligned with the UAE, while Qatar supported the post-Arab Spring Muslim Brotherhood governments in Tunisia and Egypt, and continue to encourage popular unrest in the Middle East. Turkey is the principal backer of Qatar's vision. The UAE-Qatar rivalry is especially visible in Libya. The UAE military supports the Libyan National Army Chief Khalifa Haftar And Qatar backs the UN-recognized Government of National Accord, which is aligned with Islamist militia groups. The central question here is, to what extent Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE can tolerate each other's regional aspirations and positioning vis-a-vis the Middle East and the Islamic world. The Gulf states do not have a joint foreign policy and a common defense agenda. In population terms, the UAE and Qatar are among the smallest Arab nations, with their economies employing large numbers of foreign workers. Expats make up nearly 90% of the total population of the UAE and Qatar, but they are workers who receive wages and have little say in how the state is run. The citizens, 1.4 million Emiratis and 313,000 Qataris, are shareholders without voting rights, entitled to dividends in the form of the highest per capita incomes in the world. Although the economies of both countries have been hit by the weakening of oil and gas prices, the brunt of the pain has been borne by expats, while the lifestyles and livelihoods of most citizens have remained unchanged. Qataris were able to ride out the embargo as well as lower gas prices without much economic hardship. On the foreign policy front, both countries have been able to develop and maintain a high degree of autonomy from their bigger Gulf Arab neighbors. They have grown increasingly influential in the MENA region and the Horn of Africa. Both are also key actors in the broad regional arrangements that involve Israel, Iran, and Turkey. Recently, after nearly 12 years of bloodshed in Afghanistan, long-awaited peace talks with the Taliban took place in Qatar. While the Saudis and Emiratis chose to stay away, the Taliban's preferred venue was Qatar because they considered it a neutral location. Qatar as a country has balanced relations with all sides and has a prestigious status in the Islamic world according to the Taliban. Located far from war-ravaged Afghanistan, Qatar nonetheless invited the Taliban to open a political office in Doha in 2013 with Washington's support as the conflict raged. It was intended to be a base for Taliban negotiators, including accused militants, so the international community could engage with the group politically. The Doha process got off to a rocky start, with controversy erupting soon after the insurgents raised their flag above the high-walled villa. Qatar maintained contact with the Taliban during its 1996 to 2001 rule, but unlike Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates and Pakistan never established diplomatic ties. The Taliban saw Qatar, which hosts the largest US airbase in the region, as a neutral host for talks. While the situation in Afghanistan was ultimately decided on the battlefield rather than around the negotiating table, analysts say that providing political space to the Taliban was an important role for Doha. Beyond the dramatic reconciliation between Qatar and the blockading countries, the Arabian Peninsula remains beset with internal discord.